I had an analyst who was exceptionally bright, exceptionally on, but when it came to the issue of race, he was thoroughly blocked. He said to me, in his career, he had only treated one Negro. That was his word, one Negro, okay? Which I smiled at. He told me, he said, the treatment didn't go well because all the guy wanted to do was talk about race. I couldn't get him off race, okay? I smiled again.
One of my teachers was one of those old white guys who could not hear the word race. He used to take his cane and beat the table.
There's been near violent reactions to the things I say about the way racism, culture, and economic inequality affects my life and my work with my patients. And I presented in London at the Freud Museum. One psychiatrist grabbed me by my arm and wouldn't let me go up the steps.
He couldn't metabolize this black man. He couldn't think about this black man. The issue of race so prompts excessive anxiety that it blocks off our capacity to think. Patients can come and talk about angry and hostile and murderous, rageful feelings toward family members, okay, which is very personal. But then if you ask them about a negative racial thought, they'll close up on you. In America, we don't talk about that.
We just don't have a language for talking about race in a thoughtful way. So a Black psychoanalytic group, as a vanguard group, does the important task of saying, this is something important to talk about. At least it can be put on the table and it can be examined.
Being black in America is an extremely complicated and difficult task. It has been for me.
Every day somebody does something that is an attack on me in a micro way.
No one ever expects you to be a psychoanalyst. People have actually come and said, you're Cheryl Thompson?
When I first opened up my practice, I was in a suite. I was the only black there, and none of the whites had even a master's degree. They all had bachelors doing therapy. And I would watch blacks walk past me saying, well, at least I got the better therapist.
I point out to my white liberal friends that never have they ever made a white referral to me. It's always black folks. I refer all kinds of folks to them all the time.
Microaggressions have they have a way of building up, because you just don't pay any attention. They're so small, why should you be oversensitive? All like that, right? They build up and become, in my opinion, rage. And like, oh my God, that was such a small thing. Why'd I go off? Well, it's like you've been eating microaggressions for a diet, and the diet is killing you.
There's a not so distant link to slavery. There's a not so distant link to physical danger, both emotional and physical danger, annihilation. It's a matter of life and death. Racial discrimination, actually.
Forever, it seems to me, we've had a problem about self and other. When you think about really back in the day when we lived in family groups in the caves, others were people who could take your food or take your whatever, space.
Human beings are inherently insecure and have reasons to be anxious in the world. We start from a position of absolute dependency. Safety is a project that every human being is engaged in.
We're all afraid of dying. I mean, the ultimate human fear is that I will not be here. I'm here for a short while, and how do I make myself special? And therefore you create an other who you project into it all your fears, all your anxieties.
I think there is a tendency in people that I am pretty convinced is inborn or taught very, very, very early, or some combination. There's a tendency for people to cast outside of oneself those things you do not like and put them into other people. That's what I mean in general by othering. I think the othering phenomenon is at the heart of prejudice and the different isms.
Racism is a bunch of projections, right? All the business about you're not as intelligent. It's a projection by somebody else's feeling about intelligence. The hypersexuality in black men, right? Some projection by somebody else's feeling about their sexuality, right? So forever, it seems to me, we've had a problem about self and other. It doesn't mean that we can't evolve. The old prejudice that if you go messing around in my mind, you're going to take my anger away. Black men have said this to me so many times in my professional career as a psychoanalyst. I don't want you to mess with my anger. My anger is what helps me survive.
One stereotype about psychoanalysis is that it focuses on you and what's in you and your internal conflicts and holds you responsible for your predicament. One could say, blames you for your predicament.
This profession actually reaches in and helps people at the deepest places. And people can heal from their traumas and their wounds. And as a people, you know we have traumas and wounds up the wazoo. We have a lot to deal with so that we can be contributors.
My experience has been that the clinical psychoanalysis in this country is essentially bankrupt. It's been captured by the middle class, it's been captured by a sort of naive individuality, and it probably meets 5% of the population's needs. It's therefore not appropriate, not just for black people, for anybody struggling against systemic discrimination, systemic oppositions. It doesn't really offer much.
Some of my friends, more radical friends, made comments about, how could you do that? How could you, try to make people fit into this rotten, lousy system, especially people of color?
I have a very strong sense that the victim stance is overly available to people of color.
My book partner, Audrey Edwards, and I were trying to come to understand how it is that some blacks are able to be successful and to see if we could find some commonalities. We saw things like the ability to be a pioneer. That is, to go someplace where there are very few of you, few people who look like you, to sustain yourself, find some ways of sustaining yourself until the environment that you're in begins to support your being there, okay? And without that ability to pioneer, your genes get washed from the pool. I mean, I knew guys, had to be a little careful with this, but I knew guys when I was in graduate school who I used to think much smarter, than me, who couldn't tolerate, okay, being around so many whites, okay? And blew out, okay? And just, acted out, did some crazy stuff, and just blew out. They couldn't deal with that, okay? So again, it's like finding some way to sustain yourself.
It's what Freire calls private revolution. Maybe you can fix yourself, but the larger structure, there ain't nothing you can do with that. And seeing that African Americans and black people are at the forefront of struggling for systemic change, that's not gonna work. What we don't have is an alternate black model, if you will, of how to be smart, progressive, and still be, quote, true to the community. But then it becomes a chicken and egg problem, because if our best and our brightest are being educated out of the community, they're the ones who we'd expect to do the theorizing and to think through how one helps.
The more we have these conversations, I think, the more likely it is that the connection between self and other gets to be more benign and less scary and less fraught with the fears around loss of identity. Really, because my cave is here and your cave is there. What happens if you come into my cave? You mess with who we are, just your being there, right? And so it's very old part of ourselves. But that's okay. Come mess with my, it's all right. You're not going to die. Anxiety's not going to kill you. Being connected is not going to erase your identity.
The beauty of America is that when it has to adapt, it will adapt. And there are people looking at the numbers and they see that this country is getting browner. Not necessarily blacker, but it's getting browner. Those are consumers. So in a sort of a somewhat cynical way, I think the demographics are on our side in terms of the browning of every institution. I am not as optimistic that those institutions will be more enlightened or more progressive, because they will seduce those brown-skinned people into just thinking in traditional, I can't even call it white ways, in traditional, get some money, buy a house, use some drugs, and just shut the fuck up.